Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app.
And the big story on Action News.
Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
And welcome in everyone to another edition of the Labor and Energy Show with J-Doc and Krausey. Great to be here as we move through the month of August and then get ready, J-Doc, for what will be a fantastic 12-week run in the fall months starting in September. We're going to really increase the campaign per se on changing the narrative, staying true to why the Labor and Energy Show is in existence. And we're going to make a full court press now that we've reached a point of the fall here in year number 2. Excited to be here. And we've got a great guest lined up, 2 great guests lined up for today's show.
Absolutely, Joe. And I'm excited for the fall as well as we expand our initiative in educating the public, our policymakers, and of course, our labor community. And having said that, today, you're right, we do have a great show, Joe. Certainly, we have John Bersacelli, former deputy speaker of the New Jersey Assembly, and a candidate again for the New Jersey State Senate District 3, and Jim Appleton, who's the president of New Jersey Coalition of Automotive Retailers, aka New Jersey Car. And Joe, a lot of time recently we've been talking a lot about electric vehicle mandates, and we're going to continue that conversation today. Not because we're obsessed with cars, okay? Because there's so much more to this issue. It literally impacts so much of our lives, typically, and the mandates. That's really the focus. We're all supportive of electric vehicles coming into the market, excited about it, if you will. However, we have New Jersey who's following in California's footsteps and creating and being a part of the EV mandate, so that as of 2035 in New Jersey, they'll only, based upon this initiative, they'll only be able to sell electric vehicles. And it impacts so many people. It's so not necessary. And, we're going to talk about those issues and how they'll impact us and what the public thinks of them, and of course our political leaders.
Our platform is to educate, and we're starting to see more and more people go to Apple or Spotify and download the Labor and Energy Show. You can do that as well if you missed the live broadcast or you missed the broadcast on YouTube. Just go to Apple or Spotify and search the Labor and Energy Show. Delaware, I imagine, is another state, J-Doc, that falls into that category. We've had some conversations. I actually had a conversation with a gentleman this week, a listener of the show, who brought up his own personal concerns about what that mandate could potentially mean to him financially. So I know, or we know, that the listening audience, and as you said, the topic affects them individually. It meets each one of the listeners, each member of the community at a different point in the spectrum where they are. So it's an important conversation for sure.
No question about it. Just to give you an example of why organized labor, is involved in this, this fight, if you will. The fact of the matter is, and you hear all the conspiracy theories and all that stuff, and you just tune it out. But China owns the supply chain for electric vehicles. Okay, manufacturing, wholesale distribution, the mining of the materials that it takes, and literally speaking, we're shutting. We have politicians that are shutting down, a lot of our political leaders that are shutting down the internal combustion engine automobiles, gas-fueled cars, and handing the entire industry over. If they had their way, and in many states, as you're seeing, including New Jersey, the governor is literally mandating that as of 2035. And by the way, it rolls back into 2026. I believe that's when it starts. We won't be able to buy gas-fueled cars. So the fact of the matter is, all those jobs and that entire chain okay, supply chain that goes into the EV process is owned by China. We're going to lose all that work. And let me just state one thing: we all care about our environment, big time. Everybody, and it's a priority. But we just can't, shut things down and hope for a good result, and click a switch and turn our entire auto industry upside down and lose the entire industry. We need to try other solutions, work together, and make things work. EVs are great. We want them into the market, but not at a mandated in a mandated manner.
Yeah, let the market determine whether or not they have an appetite for an EV vehicle, and let it fall the way it normally would fall here in our great country, the United States. Before we get to our first break and then get into the show, just quickly, J-Doc, let's give the listening audience a reference on our upcoming guest who's going to join and go one-on-one with you after the break, and then I'll get into a commercial break.
John Versatelli, like I said, is the former mayor of Paulsboro, represented the 3rd General Assembly District for 20 years, most recently Deputy Speaker of the Assembly, and again is running for the seat. And so fascinating individual, has had the wherewithal to stand up and oppose Governor Murphy's efforts to ban gas stoves and gas powered cars. And I'm ecstatic and looking forward to the conversation.
We'll get to that opening segment with J-Doc as after this commercial break. You're listening and you're watching the Labor and Energy Show with J-Doc and Krausey. Back in a moment. If you own a company and you're not producing a podcast, you're missing out. The public consumes messaging when they're ready. Join the professional podcast network of companies and let Jacob Media Partners put you in the podcast arena. Come to our professional studio, or we'll come to your place of business and professionally produce your company podcast. Call Jacob Media right now at 267-261-3428. 267-261-3428.
Do you stream on a Roku, a Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app. Watch Action News live.
And the big story on Action News.
Plus special programming, breaking news, and severe weather updates.
Tremendous amounts of rain.
Always on. Always the news team you trust. Watch 6ABC 24/7 on your streaming device. Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
We're back with John Versatelli, candidate for the New Jersey Senate District 3, longtime assemblyman, and of course, longtime mayor of Paulsboro. John, welcome to the broadcast.
Joe, happy to be here. Really appreciate the work this show does in presenting information that allows people to have a flow and a point of reference to reach conclusions. So education, you guys use that word a couple times in your opening. It really means a lot because Americans are smart. First of all, they're smart to not want to work and be on vacation more than they're working, but they're also very smart if approached correctly and given the time to absorb and to reach conclusions. So often people forget that.
And John, I appreciate that. And we do the labor show here in Philadelphia. Been doing it for 9 years. Okay, proud Democrats. You're a Democrat as well, and certainly I've been passionate about a lot, especially labor issues, but across the board, this energy issue is something that's been hard to wrap my head around, man. And so many things have happened since we got involved, since they shut down the PES refinery in Philly. And by the way, Joe Krausey and I, we're just like a lot of our friends, family, and our coworkers and our labor members, all kitchen table environmentalists. We all care about it, okay? But did we know the facts and the information, and are we making decisions that really, in a sense, if you just have a little bit of information, not a lot, okay, you can make an educated decision on what's really going on. And of course, a lot of these mandates, electric vehicle mandates, and of course, the stove, the stove, mandates in the kitchen, in your kitchen, for crying out loud. You got to educate yourself. And so one of the things I wanted to say, and by the way, John, you're no stranger to the broadcast. We're happy to have you back on. You made news recently when you announced that you opposed Governor Murphy's efforts to ban gas stoves and even gasoline-powered cars by 2035. Okay, your leadership on that issue and those, and what we look at as extreme policies, it was actually a breath of fresh air. Instead of coming up with common sense policies on our own, many of our Democratic leaders, unfortunately, including Governor Murphy, seem to have adopted these extreme policies that seem to leave out the facts and details when it comes to these critical energy issues. If you would, how did this happen? Okay, like I said, we all care about the environment, but in a sense, it's almost like being a part in the Twilight Zone.
Well, Joe, a couple points. First of all, mandates are always not well received, especially in the 3rd legislative district, which I represent, which is a good part of which I represented, which is a good part of Gloucester County, all of Salem County, and part of Cumberland County, and I think statewide as well. You got to educate people and get them to a point, but also, you understand the world of labor, so you understand negotiations. A lot of times, people that have a position and are in a position to say mandate, do that as leverage and part of pushing their chips into the table and say, okay, we're going to do a mandate by this date. And then the negotiations begin of what that mandate looks like. Does it really happen? Doesn't it happen? What are the components? How much of the goal of the mandate do they actually in the end get? It becomes part of a bigger negotiation. And that's why I've got to have the right people in New Jersey circumstances. You've got to have the right people at the State House, because that's going to be a tug of war and a fist fight and all the things that go along with it. And you got to stay focused. So, it's the governor can say what he wants to say, but there's 2 legislative bodies that have to participate. In particular, on the gas stove thing, I think the administration was attempting to do an end run around the legislative process to use the BPU to establish a mandate. Then there was early pushback by a number of people, myself included. I'm just a small voice. And the BPU, and I know all those people there, they're very good people. They said, wait a second, we got to rethink this. And they went back to the approach to do maybe an incentive program. And as I said publicly a couple of times, I'm a customer of South Jersey Gas. The bill comes 12 months a year, whether I'm using gas or not using gas in the summertime. And ratepayers here just paid for a major infrastructure upgrade to go to high pressure lines all through the system because the demand for natural gas has grown so much. So that investment's got to be recouped. I have natural gas in my house. Although I don't think we cook with it. As little as Janice uses the kitchen, I'm not sure. I don't know why we still have a kitchen, by the way. Yeah, we probably should use that space for something else. But we are gas heated, and I think gas hot water in one of the units. But the point is that mandates get mentioned, and they have to be negotiated. And I don't think mandates is always the best way to go. But I say to you, because you understand labor and labor negotiations, the other side starts off and says, I'm in a position, we're going to do a mandate. Then you have to push back and say, well, wait a second. Let's talk about this. Mandates don't work. Don't work for electric cars. Don't work on the gas deal. And the electric car thing, I know I'm being a bit long-winded. A new automobile, and frankly, a used automobile, is often the second largest purchase any homeowner or a citizen makes. Next to buying a house, a car is the next biggest investment. So the idea that we're going to say that at a given date, gasoline vehicles no longer can be purchased, what does that do to investments that people made in buying cars? So suppose, and what happens, it's just, so, I think the marketplace has to dictate on this stuff. I think the marketplace is dictating. And I go back to our last show I mentioned to you. If we had a federal energy policy, if we could all get on the same page here, then we could figure out where we're going. But we don't have that. So we're down to a couple of refineries on the East Coast at most. We're subject to flow of gasoline from out of the country in large part, especially serving the Northeast. What happens in a national crisis, national emergency? How about moving the military? Is anybody thinking we're going to move military vehicles to all electric by 2033 in remote places in the desert with portable charging stations? I mean, look, it could all come at some point, but we have to be realistic. And we have to say, like you said it correctly. Nobody's against progress, advancements. It'll all come. But I think the marketplace has to dictate. And if I would say to you, if you could get to 30% of the cars, if you get to China and India to participate in trying to save the environment, we'd be way ahead of the game because America's doing its part plus.
Absolutely. In fact, the progress, we've gone to the number one country in the world in regards to fighting emission. Okay, low carb. And then, of course, in 1 year, a lot of our foreign countries ate up all the progress we made. But let me just say one thing, and you make some great points. I totally agree and understand, in a sense, getting a negotiating stance. Okay, we'll go for the extreme, and then we negotiate back, and that way, at least we got a good position to start with. But a lot of these mandates have consequences. Okay, and you look at what California is doing, and I think there's over a dozen states that automatically opt into a lot of their policies. And so, you have, for example, a lot of our refineries, our traditional energy industries seek investment. These mandates impact that investment. They lose all kinds of potential there. So there are impacts on this. When you talk to the public, and we had this is, as a political leader, a long-time political leader, this I'm sure hits home. And this is really one thing that's confusing. Okay, we had a pollster on a recent broadcast, Stephen Hankin of Lincoln Park Strategies, that did work for centrist Democrats of America on this topic, and we discussed it. And he polled New Jersey specifically, and there was an overwhelming overwhelming support for electric vehicles, but overwhelming opposition against mandates. And one of the things that people are saying is we have so many more important issues. The environment's an important issue, no question about it, but using this as a strategy. Now, the governor barely won his re-election, okay? And given the last election cycle and the polling, you would think that he would reject an extreme policy, but he's doubling down on it. What do you think about his stance in regards to politics in general, noting that the general public is not passionate about the mandates?
Well, look, I consider Governor Murphy to be a friend. I disagree with him on a number of policy issues, but never to the point to being disagreeable. I mean, I support some stuff, and other stuff I don't support. When I was in the state house, that was my position. It was the same way with Christie and Corzine and McGreevey and Governor Cody. I mean, I served with 5 different governors. So, these things are tricky. I think the governor and the immediate people around him are true believers. And you have to take that into consideration, and you have to respect another person's opinion. I don't agree with that, with the timing and the kind of pace that he would take us at. And and I don't know that he is the driver of how to pace this on negotiations. Maybe others around him are. So he's a true believer. I respect that. I don't fall in line with that exact position. My real world experience tells me that we need a balance of everything. And I've said it on the show before. We need wind, we need solar, we need nuclear, and we need oil, and we need natural gas. What that final mix is, who knows? The market will dictate. But and when I say market will dictate, as in conversation, a gallon of gasoline takes an automobile further today than it ever did in the history of internal combustion engines. The cars are running cleaner. The great ozone layer, hole in the ozone layer, whatever that was, seems that that got put on got taken care of apparently. And again, I repeat, America is doing its part. Cars are cleaner, emissions from generation plants are cleaner, and our federal policy is lagging in our relationships with China and India, and making the case to those people that look, we can't do this by ourselves. We got winds are blowing from China into California. And maybe that's why California is so goofy in the rules they make. Maybe it's the air they're breathing. I don't know. But the point is we can't be isolationists in this environmental equation, and America can't bear the whole thing. And Joe, as far as the electric cars go, because I know I drive a Tesla and I have a Toyota Camry. I have both. I have 9 fire trucks that get 3 miles to the gallon. So I always tell my Karlovich, I'm doing my part with refinery economics. So buying plenty of various products. But the point is, this stuff finds its place. There are places I prefer it to be in the Camry. If I'm going towards Altoona, Pennsylvania, for example, to a railroad in the Hitherlands, I take a gasoline car. If I'm going to Newport, Rhode Island, I'll run the electric car because I know what the charging circumstances are. That's my choice. And choice is important, I think. So mandates, I think, again, you got to pay attention to them because you have a governor saying something, it means something. I think Delaware has the same mandate at 2035. That the leader of that state, both states have set a benchmark, and now it's up to people to get into the mix and say this is what really should happen, and this is what's in our best interest.
In PA, Governor Shapiro is engaging a number of entities on the issue: labor, traditional energy, and our renewable industry, and our environmentalists, and in a sense putting people in a room and trying to work out the issues. One of the things that we profess, John, is that listen, work together. Let the top people across the board work on these solutions. You talk about natural gas, which has been a huge part of the emissions reduction in our country. And our thought process is if we can work together, on technologies like carbon capture in a lot of our other areas of traditional energy, we can make this happen. Organize labor, and the reason I get and I absolutely understand the politics and the fact that we can our plan is to negotiate this, but organized labor. When you think about these mandates, and you and I have talked about you mentioned the automobiles and having choice, and that's such a big deal. But when you think about the supply chain, and I mentioned this to Joe Krausey at the beginning of the show, the supply chain is owned by China. Okay. And that goes with solar panels. Okay. And that's an industry we created. And in a sense, when we mandate automobiles, to be EV, even when we even discuss it, but not only that, we follow in a policy that California is leader in. You then, in a sense, you look at the supply chain right now. If 10% of our cars are EVs, they own the supply chain, manufacturing, wholesale distribution, mining, all those. And we all seen the child slave labor that's going on in the Congo. It's not a secret. It's been on video. We had Siddharth Kara on the program. But my point is, organized labor is sitting there. We're looking at a workforce, and we're looking at it going down the tubes and handing it directly over. I get in a sense the negotiation strategies, but like you said, there's a lot of people that are completely bought in on this. Okay, and it's a nerve-wracking game to play when you're looking at handing an entire industry, of which, by the way, we're an entire auto industry. I mean, Japan is, we know what what their position and what their part of the industry is. Now we're taking the EV industry and putting it on a silver platter for China. And what is your thought on that in regards to working people? Because once a lot of people are just thinking about the environment and what is on the surface, but you look at the supply chain and China's ownership of it, it's a scary thing.
Well, Joe, you're touching on an issue that we won't solve from New Jersey State House, nor will I solve sitting here in Paulsboro.
Right.
But as America moved to a global economy, the American middle class was sacrificed by the corporate entities that wanted us to have access to inexpensive global labor. So in America's trade policies that took us to a global economy, it did not require the places we went to rise to an American middle class standard. And so the playing field has been unlevel and unequal in everything with regards to manufacturing. This present Washington administration talks about bringing manufacturing back, and there's signs that there is some success. And it's going to be tricky to do that, but it has to happen. I mean, you see what happened during the pandemic when goods and services, when goods couldn't get into the country, when ships couldn't be found. You see the pressure that China is now pressing onto Taiwan, which manufactures the most chips anywhere and could easily be swallowed up by China in an afternoon if China really wanted to do that. And, there's a great deal hanging there. So, again, you heard me use the term several times on the show. The federal government and its policies have failed America's middle class in many respects. And in some respects, things are better. But in many respects, it's a greater challenge for the middle class to flourish because the way middle class America made its money, fed its families, has seen it's gone away. Look at Buffalo, New York, and the loss of population there. And look at places in Ohio. We have examples in New Jersey. So when jobs leave, earning income leaves, and a lot of things leave with it. So, you talk about, the electric car industry, that's just one piece. I mean, you have so many industries that are different places. And watch what's happening now with people moving into Mexico with regard to some of these jobs, to take advantage of the trade agreement between Mexico and America. So, that's a Washington issue. And, an old timer who since passed away taught me a lesson when I was very young, and it took me years to understand exactly what he said to me. But he said, John, you're going to find that in the end, the environment we're living in is the corporations have seized the government, and the lawyers have seized the language. And as time passes, you see more and more of that. So, why is all this stuff taking place in China? Cost of labor first, number one. And this is a labor-based show. But that, and now you see stuff leaving China because in some cases, the Chinese people wanted more money, wanted to be paid more. And that government's had trouble getting their arms around it. So now we're off to Vietnam, we're off to different places and names you can't produce. But, we're not going to solve that today. In the short term, state by state, we have to decide these policies that, that affect the people that are still working and still here and make their living here. And I go back and just say very simply, mandates is not a way a democracy should govern.
And having said that, and this, I've said this on the Labor Show 100 times, and and not really going, it's not the time or the place for this conversation, but people, we sit here and Donald Trump's still on the front page of the news, but he built his momentum in his first debate when he talked about NAFTA and bringing our, nobody ever talked about bringing, stopping NAFTA and bringing our jobs and our factories back. Immediately, he got the rank and file labor members. They looked at it and were like, "Okay, there's something I don't hear very often."
Yep.
So that really makes a difference. Do you think, John? Do you think? And I had that. We had Congressman Norcross on the program one of our first shows, and I asked him when we were talking about the RFS and RINs, what his colleagues thought about, that issue. And we had national security issues there. And he said he didn't think that they understood or were educated on the issues.
Correct.
You obviously are. And when you come out and you oppose a policy or a mandate, it's not because you're just trying to be political. You have educated yourself on these issues. Do you think it's going to take, a lot of these people that have are drinking the Kool-Aid, hook, line, and sinker, need to be educated more and understand the details and the facts of the things that are going on so that we can all work together on common sense solutions?
Yeah, and Joe, look, I think the best way to start conversations on these issues is not to use the word no, and to recognize that there are multiple opinions here, and to be well positioned to make the case for your opinion, whatever that opinion is. I don't think a person can win the argument that there should be a mandate of 2035 on EVs other than to set an artificial time frame to force discussion, because there are a lot of reasons why it won't work. Now, is it something to strive for? Can you make the case? I suppose you can make the case. I happen to think as just a citizen I want balance because America is best when America has options to go to in times of crisis. And so having everything in one place is not in our interest, in my mind. And that includes energy and includes everything for that matter. We always have to have a place to turn to. If our plan A doesn't work, we got to have a plan B. A lot of times you got to have a lot more plans than just B. So again, we have to educate, and we have to be confident in what we understand to be facts. And then we also have to keep an open mind to the people we're negotiating with, because you'll win the day by being persistent. Doesn't hurt to be polite where you can, but persistence carries the day if the facts are on your side.
John, I want to thank you so much for joining us again on the Labor and Energy Show. We obviously appreciate your time and your insight, and we look forward to having you on again. And of course, best wishes in the upcoming race. Look forward to having you back in office.
Joe, thank you.
We're going to have more from the Labor and Energy Show in just a moment.
If you own a company and you're not producing a podcast, you're missing out. The public consumes messaging when they're ready. Join the professional podcast network of companies and let Jacob Media Partners put you in the podcast arena. Come to our professional studio, or we'll come to your place of business and professionally produce your company podcast. Call Jacob Media right now at 267-261-3428. 267-261-3428.
Do you stream on a Roku, a Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app. Watch action news live,
And the big story on Action News.
plus special programming, breaking news, and severe weather updates.
Tremendous amounts of rain.
Always on, always the news team you trust. Watch 6ABC 24/7 on your streaming device. Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
And you're listening and watching the Labor and Energy Show with J-Doc and Krausey. Special thanks to our opening segment and our special guest with J-Doc, John Berzicelli, the candidate for the New Jersey State Senate, District 3. A reminder, if you missed any of today's, or if you miss any of today's broadcast, you can download the podcast of the show. Go to Apple or Spotify and search the Labor and Energy Show. We'll continue on. J-Doc's next guest in our next segment, Jim Appleton. Jim is the president of the New Jersey Coalition of Automotive Retailers. He'll go one-on-one with J-Doc in 30 seconds.
Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app.
And the big story on Action News.
Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
Welcome back to the Labor and Energy Show here on the Jacob Media Network. I'm ecstatic to bring into the broadcast Jim Appleton. Jim is the president of the New Jersey Coalition of Automotive Retailers, NJ Car, if you will. Jim, welcome to the broadcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure, and we've talked a lot about on our broadcast these EV mandates, and we've said, and I think I've seen on your website, we're totally supportive of electric vehicles. Okay, I mean, a lot of our friends have them; they're great, but the mandates coming with them are an issue, and they're an issue in a lot of areas. Before we get into that, if you will, tell our listeners a little bit about, the organization and who you represent.
Yeah, sure. NJ Car is the statewide trade association that represents all of the franchised new car and truck dealers in the state. Obviously, all those dealers, the Toyota, the Honda, the Chevrolet dealers all sell used cars as well. But these aren't the independent used car dealers. These are the franchise new car dealers. 500 rooftops across the state, 35,000 men and women earn their living directly from dealerships in this state. Many of those union jobs, of course, good paying jobs, can't be outsourced, can't be shipped overseas. Neighborhood new car dealers are the economic engine on Main Street. It's a $40 billion a year industry in the state of New Jersey alone.
And so, having said that, New Jersey is officially proposing to adopt California's proposal to ban the sale of new gasoline-powered cars in 2035. Okay, we have a lot to discuss, but first, can you give me the auto dealer's perspective on this proposal, your members' perspective?
Yeah, let me just correct something and give a little context. Maybe walk down memory lane here. We signed on to the California plan 15 years ago. So New Jersey has been operating under the original California low emission vehicle plan for the last 15 years. And oh, by the way, we've never hit the percentage mandates that CARB, the California Air Resources Board, which actually controls the car market in New Jersey now, we've never hit the CARB mandates. And as a result of that, automakers and the consumers who do business with legacy automakers have forked over $1 billion to $2 billion a year in penalties and to buy credits from a non-union company, Tesla, and to support the Tesla buyers and the Tesla owners across the U.S. by subsidizing the price of the vehicles that they purchase. So we're already knee-deep in the CARB program and have been for years. The EV mandates, which the DEP has proposed re-upping on, signing to the CARB plan, would kick in 2026. Right now, the EV market is about 9%, and it's pretty much hit the plateau at this point in time.
They were predicting 25%, correct?
The mandate is for 25%.
As of right now.
Yeah. So we're not halfway home to the existing mandate. And they're talking about ramping up in 2026 to 35%. And of course, by 2035, the mandate is to be 100%. So, let me be clear. The franchise new car and truck dealers, the neighborhood new car dealers that I represent are all in on electric vehicles. They've spent this year alone probably $150 million in infrastructure, training, equipment, tools to prepare for this transformation. But the governor's proposal, the California rule, is obviously too much, too fast. I like to say New Jersey will be 100% EV when consumers decide, not when government decides. And at this point in time, consumers are voting with their pocketbooks to purchase hybrid vehicles, which are a great solution for most drivers, and plug-in hybrids and internal combustion engine vehicles are still the overwhelming majority of the market. Dealers subscribe to an all-the-above strategy when it comes to transportation. Not everybody is a good candidate to drive an electric vehicle. I happen to drive an electric vehicle. I have for the last 3 years, and I love it. I leave the house every day with 300 miles of charge, and I rarely have to go to a public charging station. But the rare occasions when I do have to go to a public charging station, it's a problem because the infrastructure isn't readily available. And at this point in time, it's not reliable. And so if I lived in a multiple unit dwelling in Camden or Newark or any other community across the state where I didn't have the option of charging at home, an electric vehicle just isn't a good solution for me. On the other hand, if I was to own a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid, I'd be able to make my daily commute and 80% of the rides that I take carbon emission free. And so I think the public policy is a classic example of allowing perfect to become the enemy of good.
Yeah, and certainly when you think about it, there are so many potential solutions. We have talked about first of all the mandates. They have so many effects, so many impacts that people. It's not just as simple as we're going to be driving, like you said. It's not just about the cars. Okay, there's so many industries. There's so many, but our position is okay. Let's educate the people on the details. Let's work on solutions together, common sense solutions. Okay, so when we talk about these issues, it gets a little confusing when you're talking about just doing the mandate. By the way, we've brought in polling organization leaders who have talked about the general public has a very, especially even in New Jersey, who have talked about these situations. There's everybody's for electric vehicles. Nobody's not, but the general public, at least in the polls that we've had, okay, that we've with the individuals that we've brought on the program, say that the general public feels strongly that there's other more important issues than mandates. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that the general public understands the impacts and the consequences of EV mandates, as they exist right now? You talked about, we've already been involved. New Jersey has already been a part of the California initiative since 2016. How many people do you think, Jim, if we knocked on our neighbors' doors, okay, understand or are aware of that, number one? Number two, understand the penalty because the people chose not to buy. And like you've said, and you said it in the article on your website, the public will determine when they want to buy them, and of course, the process. Talk about what you think in regards to the public's knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those examples. It's it's a slow burn. If I knocked on doors and I asked about inflation, everybody would tell me it hurts. Everybody would tell me they're aware of it. Everybody would tell me they're suffering. The number one driver of inflation today is new and used car sales. And that has a lot to do with supply chain disruptions, obviously, but it also has a lot to do with these mandates. The vehicles that are being sold and the cost structure for the vehicles that are being sold has been substantially affected over the last several years by government policies, and they're about to get affected even more. Our biggest concern about this mandate is that affordability is the biggest problem in the car business today. It used to be, for the last 20 years, working and middle-class families could afford to buy or lease a new car. I'm concerned that if these mandates, and I'll explain how in a moment, but if these mandates are put in place, a new vehicle will be out of reach for most working and middle-class families in New Jersey. And the reason is that if you have a top-line sales number, let's say New Jersey is pre-COVID was 500,000 vehicles a year sales. If automakers have to ship into the state 35% of their vehicles in 2026 have to be battery electrics, and that ramps up to 100% by 2035, what do you think is going to happen to that top-line number? In order to meet that 35%, they're going to have to bring that top line number down. So let's say instead of 500,000 cars a year, we're 400,000. Now that's going to affect jobs. That's going to affect the economy. That's going to affect sales tax revenues for the state. But more importantly, what it's going to do is it's going to continue what we've seen over the last couple of years, which is the inflationary impact of inventory shortages. And the higher those EV mandates go, the more pressure there's going to be on inventory. The manufacturers will ship into the state only the most expensive, high trim level vehicles. And again, my concern is that not only will these mandates affect choice, consumer choice, which is never a good thing. Dealers want to sell what consumers want to buy. But more importantly, it's going to exacerbate the existing affordability crisis that we see in the marketplace, and that's just going to throw rocket fuel on this inflation.
What's interesting also is, and I was obviously on your website, but let's also talk about a consequence. We'll take your sales. I'm in Pennsylvania, right? And I guess what I'm saying is they'll just go out of state. Your dealers have to be jumping up and down when it comes to that. You might mandate them, but New Jersey, is not on an island when it comes to that. Is there a big concern of losing business?
Yeah, look, interestingly, profiles in political courage, right? I mean, the governor's proposal doesn't say you can't buy an EV. It says the manufacturers can't ship them into the state, and therefore the dealers won't be able to sell them. So the governor stands in front of the public and says, I'm not prohibiting the sale of EVs, and that's kind of true, but it's a purposeful misrepresentation of what's going to take place here. So yeah, consumers can go into Pennsylvania, or they go cross country to Kansas, and they can buy the internal combustion engine vehicle of their choice, and they can register it here in New Jersey, and they can continue to drive that vehicle, and we get no environmental benefit. So what we're doing is we're ticking the box because we're a CARB state, but we're not really doing anything to affect consumer behavior. And what's really concerning, and what I think is the unintended consequence of this type of mandate, is that the average age of a car on the road today is already 12 and a half years. What do you think is going to happen when the affordability crisis kicks in and when consumer choice is limited? They're going to hold on to those cars even longer. And when they hold on to those cars even longer, the touted environmental and expected environmental benefits of a CARB mandate never come to fruition.
Let me ask you a question, because you bring up something and it just came to my mind. What about used cars? In other words, you make a great point. Okay, people are going to be holding on to their cars longer. Will in for example, New Jersey, will it kick up the used cars purchases?
Absolutely. That's what we've seen, in the inventory constraints we've experienced post-COVID because of supply chain disruptions. What the manufacturers have learned is that they can raise MSRP 3, 4, 5 times on new cars. And as new cars become more profitable for the manufacturers and for the dealers too, they become less affordable for consumers. We're pushing would-be new car buyers into the used car market. The law of supply and demand tells us that those used car values are going to skyrocket as well. Again, new and used cars are the leading cause of inflation in this country. And the government mandates around EVs are a contributing factor. I'm not saying they're the reason, but they are a major contributing factor.
And so talk about the loss of tax revenues in when people buy cars out of state. Okay. That's another impact that we're talking about.
Yeah, well, and no, when they buy a car out of state, if they register it here in New Jersey, they pay sales tax. But here's something you and your viewers and listeners may not be aware of. You don't pay sales tax on an EV. So when we get to 100% EVs in this state, all that sales tax revenue, $1.5 billion a year in sales tax revenue, disappears. So, we're going to have to address that. And oh, by the way, EVs don't pay gas taxes. Gas taxes fund the Transportation Trust Fund, which creates jobs and ensures that the roads and bridges in this state are safe to travel on. And so that has to be addressed, the depletion of funds in the Transportation Trust Fund. And also, let me give your listeners one other thing to ponder. An electric vehicle is 1,000 to 2,000, depending on the battery size, pounds heavier than an internal combustion engine vehicle. I happen to live in the Lambertville area, and when I drive across that old rickety bridge between Lambertville and New Hope on a Saturday or a Sunday, it's literally bumper to bumper both sides. that bridge probably cannot sustain the weight that would be associated with an all EV marketplace. So the Transportation Trust Fund is losing funding, but the demands on its resources are going to grow exponentially over the next few years.
Jim, here in Pennsylvania, I don't know. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is an initiative that a lot of states opted in, and Pennsylvania's been going back and forth, and there's a huge fight here. New Jersey is a part of it already, and one of the things that some of our labor leaders have said, Rob Baer, who's been on this program, who's the president of the Pennsylvania Building and Construction Trades, has said that he felt like, we have so many natural energy resources here in Pennsylvania, okay, with the Marcellus Shale and everything we got going. Why would we opt into somebody else's energy policy, okay? It seems in a sense, I realize that that a number of states have opted into California's policies, but have you, what is your thought on creating New Jersey's own energy policy in regards to emissions and all those things?
Well, look, elections have consequences, and we have a energy policy here in the state. It's been set by this governor and the BPU, and we have energy policy. You may not like it. I may have concerns about it, but we have energy policy. It's wind, it's renewables, it's transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources. Whether that is doable, whether it's economically feasible, that's way above my pay grade. I'm a car guy, right? I mean, I can't tell you about that, but I can tell you this much: in the world that I live in, 14 states that account for 40% of all U.S. vehicle sales have opted in to the CalLEV program. The automakers have invested hundreds of billions of dollars in designing and retooling to build electric vehicles. This ship has sailed. The vehicles, government mandates can force manufacturers to build, and the manufacturers will force the dealers to take those vehicles. But none of the policies that the governor or any of the other public policymakers have proposed so far are going to make consumers buy something they don't want. And so I think we've got a long way to go before the consumers catch up with this radical government policy. And I think there are some calmer voices that hopefully will eventually prevail in this debate. Take, for example, Toyota. And I don't typically single out a manufacturer, but I will say Toyota has had a decades-long commitment to hybrid vehicles and now plug-in hybrid vehicles, with a vision for a gradual transition from internal combustion engine only to a appropriate mix of battery and fuel cells, which are another option that will be developing down the road, and hybrid vehicles. But government has decided on an all or nothing at all policy. And as I say, this is really a great example of perfect being the enemy of good. There are very sensible, middle of the road, gradual solutions to this problem that the industry and engineering and the energy sector can all come together to make happen. But the political will doesn't exist right now to do that.
That's a great point that you make. And common sense and edge, when you talk about,
common sense isn't so common.
Well, exactly. So when you talk about a world with solar and wind and all them, nobody's fighting it. Okay, we know it's, but just flicking a switch and pretending like, you hide yourself under the covers that we're not going to need our traditional energy resources to support the renewables. Okay, so many things that are just not being talked about. And this is by the way, this a trend that we're talking about that the auto industry is going through is exactly what so many other industries are going through. And your point is well made. And I like that. Perfect. Being the enemy of good. We have about 30 seconds, Jim. Any closing thoughts as we move forward and continue this conversation?
No, look, I would say that, the DEP has proposed this regulation. It's not a surprise. We've got 60 days for comment. I urge your listeners and we've been urging the members of the legislature to roll up their sleeves and to comment. Again, if the DEP is hell-bent on adopting this regulation, which we think would be a mistake, then they ought to be forced to write into the regulation a midterm review so that when we get to 2026 or 2027, we take another look at all this. Because something we haven't talked about at all is while the CARB and the DEP in New Jersey are proposing this new rule, the federal EPA is also proposing a new rule, which is significantly more stringent than the existing federal program. And you've got to question whether or not New Jersey should be continuing with CARB when there is another alternative, which they have not looked at in the offing. So let's slow the roll at the DEP. And if your listeners are inclined to do so, they should participate in this rulemaking process by filing comments.
And the comment period started, I believe, this week, right?
Started on Monday, and it'll run for 60 days. So sometime in October, the comment period will be over. And by the way, we have an election coming up in November. We've urged those who are running for re-election in this legislative cycle to make their voices heard as well, because we think this is a classic example of regulators sidelining elected officials to adopt policies which are not popular and can't be sustained.
Jim Appleton, President, New Jersey Coalition of Automotive Retailers. We want to thank you for being our guest on the Labor and Energy Show.
Well, thanks for asking me. Take care.
It's our pleasure. We're going to have more from the Labor and Energy Show in just a minute.
If you own a company and you're not producing a podcast, you're missing out. The public consumes messaging when they're ready. Join the professional podcast network of companies and let Jacob Media Partners put you in the podcast arena. Come to our professional studio, or we'll come to your place of business and professionally produce your company podcast. Call Jacob Media right now at 267-261-3428. 267-261-3428.
Do you stream on a Roku, a Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app. Watch Action News live,
And the big story on Action News.
plus special programming, breaking news, and severe weather updates.
Tremendous amounts of rain.
Always on, always the news team you trust. Watch 6ABC 24/7 on your streaming device. Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
And back here on the Labor and Energy Show with J-Doc and Krausey. Boy, we only have a couple of minutes left, J-Doc. And Jim Appleton, the president of the New Jersey Coalition of Automotive Retailers, said a lot. Boy, there was a lot of information that Jim provided, including the staggering amount of money that is generated just in the state of New Jersey by the franchised automotive dealerships throughout the state. Imagine multiplying that by the number of states in this country. It is absolutely incredible. Great job. Great conversation with you and Jim.
Yeah, you can hear in Jim Appleton's voice, and he was doing everything he could to be, obviously, professional, not trying to, wake up sleeping giants. He knows that we depend on our politics, but these extreme initiatives are confusing. And what I love, the one thing he said was, he talked about hybrids and what great solutions, but he also talked about, an extreme left creating a situation where perfect is the enemy of good. And that is a quote that I think we're going to hold on to because, and you also, you heard he talked about there's a public comment period on the plan to ban the sale of gas-powered cars by 2035 in New Jersey, and I profess that everybody Googles that and gives your comments. We know the general public, like you and I talked about when we had Stephen Hankin on. We all support electric vehicles, but the mandates are just, people don't support them. Let's come up with a group of our leadership in all of our areas: labor, energy, auto, political, renewables, environmental, and come up with really common sense solutions. And by the way, what he talked about, the hybrids, they're great solutions. So, and so many other areas, so many other people get injured by these.
Well, in the words, J-Doc, of Jim Appleton from this interview, common sense, not so common.
Yeah, no question about it, Joe. And you and I know, because it's really the mantra of the show, and that is common sense and energy, learning the details, coming up with common sense solutions. You heard him talk about the solar and the wind and all those, and it's a stereotypical conversation. We all support those initiatives. Can't just flick a switch like Brendan Williams of PBF Energy says, and think that that's the transition. It's not. People aren't going to be happy until the general public gets bit in the butt and we can't turn our air conditioners on. And certainly, there's a lot here, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.
No doubt about that. Special thanks to our listeners and our viewers for tuning in to another edition of the Labor and Energy Show with J-Doc and Krausey, and a very big special thanks to our two guests today, J-Doc, who were both very informative, two very good segments, with a reminder for our audience that you can re-listen or re-watch this broadcast. Go to Apple or Spotify, search the Labor and Energy Show. 30 seconds, J-Doc, and then I've got to say goodbye.
I just encourage our listeners to, and by the way, we've had the American fuel and petrochemical manufacturers send us information on this. Get involved in the public comment period on the plan to ban sale of gas-powered cars in New Jersey. Let your voice be heard. We already know that we support electric vehicles, no question. We don't support the mandates. They're unnecessary, and they cause more problems than they're worth. Our left hand is writing checks, our right hand can cash. Go to Google and get involved in the public comment period of the gas-powered cars in Jersey. Our lives and the impact on our lives depends on it.
Labor and Energy Show with J-Doc and Krausey. That's going to do it for this edition of the Labor and Energy Show with J-Doc and Krausey. Stay tuned for our next edition or re-listen to one of our previous shows. We've had so many great shows with lots of information. We continue on our objective to educate the public. On behalf of my partner, J-Doc, I'm Joe Kraus. See you next time, everybody.
If you own a company and you're not producing a podcast, you're missing out. The public consumes messaging when they're ready. Join the professional podcast network of companies and let Jacob Media Partners put you in the podcast arena. Come to our professional studio, or we'll come to your place of business and professionally produce your company podcast. Call Jacob Media right now at 267-261-3428. 267-261-3428.